Now, of course, the topic of risk investment and, of course, compliance in Africa's extractive industries has come to light, especially as we battle with climate change. Well, the EBII Group is hosting, or rather will host, the 4th edition of the Africa Investment Risk and Compliance Summit in Washington, D.C. And this year's theme will be sustainable resource extraction in a changing climate. Now, some of the key topics include mapping out Africa's extractive resources, navigating investment challenges, and also understanding regulatory frameworks on the continent. Well, let's delve further into their discussions. We're now joined by Adjoa Adjie-Twum. She is the founder and CEO of compliance and risk management consultancy firm EBII Group. Great to have you with us on the show. Now, of course, this year's summit will be exploring some of those solutions to Africa's investment challenges, particularly in sustainable resource extraction on the continent, in light of climate change as well. Give us more insight into the objective behind, of course, this year's discussions.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me. So with the objective behind the theme of this year, it's very simple. If you look at conversations around the world currently, it's all about climate change. Also, the extractive industry plays a very key role. So with this, clean energy technologies have become very important with a lot of focus on electric vehicles. We also have a lot of focus around solar technologies, and Africa plays host to majority of these critical minerals. So we're looking about 55% of cobalt, 47% on manganese, and then 21% on natural graphite. These are some of the figures. We also have lithium, 1% of lithium, 5.6% of nickel. So Africa plays host to a lot of these critical minerals. And what that means is that the continent is offered a unique opportunity to be at the forefront of this shift of climate solutions. The theme this year has become very, very important because the continent needs to attract the right investors in the extractive sector. So these are investors that would come and ensure that there's a lot of benefit also for the locals and the governments of these countries. It's not just investors that come in and take everything out and leaving nothing for the continent. And this is why we're gathering heads of state. We've got business leaders, policymakers, some Congress people at the White House, investors all together convening to find solutions on the 22nd and 23rd of July in Washington, D.C.
Right. Now, speaking of investors, you also say you will be addressing a key issue, which is Africa's risk perception versus the reality on the ground. So what is your take? Is there still a major disconnect between the two? How are you going to approach that discussion?
Absolutely. So there is a disconnect. I mean, Africa has very unique challenges. Of course, there's 54 countries with different rules and regulations across each country on the continent. It's not like Europe, whereby you'd have the EU laws and different countries across the European Union will adopt those rules and include a little bit of their country-specific rules in those regulations, making it very consistent across Europe and similar to the US. Africa is very unique, and the continent is currently faced with an estimated 200 billion trade and investment financing gap, and that's due to investment risk and challenges. And when we speak to a lot of investors, especially in the US, they want to put their money on the continent, but they're all very concerned. Most of them are concerned either due to past experience, and then others are concerned because of what they've heard or what they've read. And so a lot of investors perceive the continent as much riskier than any other continent. Majority of the challenges and why they perceive the continent as a lot more riskier to do with financial risk, and is also to do with corruption risk. The financial risk covers several things, even in terms of repatriation of funds. When they come into the continent to invest, getting their money out sometimes is a very big challenge. We also have issues to do with exchange rate issues, instability, political instability, And then, of course, I would say the major one is the financial risk, which I've explained, that covers especially the exchange rate. Financial crime is another thing, and the corruption side. And I'm not saying that Africa is more corrupt than everywhere else in the world. I don't believe corruption has a color. But when systems and controls are not in place, you find that more people take advantage, whether it's people within the continent or even the investors will come and take advantage of the continent. So there's definitely a risk on the continent. There is no country or continent without a risk. But I think Africa is faced with more unique challenges, of course, because of languages. Different countries on the continent speak more than one language. And also there is no standardization of rules and regulations across the continent. That makes it a bit more riskier when investors are considering the continent to do business.
You are quite right, but you also mentioned something. You said it's also an important time for us to be having this conversation because there are a lot of changes going on, such as climate change, for example. And I'd like to get a sense of how stakeholders are rethinking issues like risk, compliance, and of course the future of partnerships on the continent, engagement as well in extractive resources, especially in this age where there are changes like artificial intelligence, for example.
Well, thank you. So stakeholders at the moment, if you look at those who are interested in the continent, and I'm looking from the perspective of Europe and the US, there's more interest in Africa than we have ever seen on the continent. The US government has gone extra mile to put in certain government departments that really focuses on enhancing relationships with the African continent. I was actually very privileged to join the Vice President, Kamala Harris, as part of the delegation last year that went to Africa on her official visit. And that's one of the, she went there to see how they could explore partnerships with the continent rather than giving aid to the continent. And there were several areas that they looked at. If you look at Europe, it's the same thing. And so artificial intelligence is going to play a major role in us helping to address risk. And that's the only reason, that's the only way a lot of these investors and countries who want to explore opportunities on the continent will actually move and take action. It won't just be a conversation. It won't be something they start and then they are concerned and they pull back. So there's enhanced risk management. Artificial intelligence will play a major role in helping large corporations analyze data set. They can identify potential threat patterns that help to reduce operational risk. There's also RegTech, that's regulatory technology. So there are companies currently that are using artificial intelligence tools to almost automate compliance processes and to monitor regulatory changes so that every company who are using their ecosystem is able to understand what is coming, how do they prepare for what controls they need to put in place to make sure that they are compliant with these rules and regulations. In terms of future of partnership, artificial intelligence will also play a great role, especially with platforms that enable seamless data sharing and communications that would allow, of course, partners to collaborate on projects that has greater transparency and efficiency. So these are some of the things. There's also the ethical collaboration side of things, sustainability and environmental stewardship. So AI can play a role where companies are using artificial intelligence to optimize resource extraction processes, minimize environmental impact, also improve resource mapping and monitoring. So those are different ways that I believe that artificial intelligence could really play a major role in this transition.
Well, as you explore all these issues, changing the way the industry engages going forward, you mentioned partnerships versus aid being a key discussion point. What are some of the key outcomes you expect to see from this year's conference?
So the reason why we've gathered leaders from Europe, from the US, and from the continent, even from the Caribbean, we've got the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, who will be contributing, giving a keynote address at the conference. First of all, of course, we recognize the need for partnership. The diaspora is going to play a very key role that includes the Caribbean nations. But one of the major things that we want to drive out of this is key issues that needs to be addressed, especially when it comes to risk management. What are the concerns? So what are the resources on the continent? How do investors get access to it? Whether it's the diaspora, whether it's just foreign investors, either non-diaspora investors. How do they get access to these resources to ensure that it's mutually beneficial for all parties involved? One side of the partners don't take everything out and leave the others suffering. But also, what are the controls? What needs to be done to gain the trust of these investors? Even if it's a diaspora investor, we need to gain their trust to help us as a continent in Africa to be able to progress. So at the end of the conference, we will collect all the outcome and put together a team that will work with us to ensure that there's implementation. And that would mean that we would do a bit of lobbying, would have to kind of liaise with the different governments involved, whether it's the US, European government, as well as African government, and work together to see how some of these could be addressed, either ourselves or partner with other sort of major organizations across the US. Thank you.